Mid-2000 Los Angeles, California. A low-slung, pristine $100,000 Ferrari pulls up to the curb. To anyone standing on the sidewalk, this is not just the sound of a car. It's a precise and powerful mechanical heart, breathing life into the cool night air. This car represents the ultimate dream. It is a physical manifestation of victory, status, intelligence, and power. You look at the car. Your eyes are glued to the shimmering paint, the sleek curves of the Italian metal, the emblem on the hood. But ask yourself an honest question. Are you looking at the driver? Do you think, wow, that driver must be incredibly smart, sophisticated, and deeply respected? No. You don't think about the driver at all. Instead, a bizarre psychological glitch occurs in your subconscious. You look at the car and immediately imagine yourself in the driver's seat. You think, if I were driving that car, everyone would look at me. Everyone would admire me. This is the man in the car paradox. The paradox is brutal and absolute. We buy expensive, flashy things because we desperately crave respect and admiration from others. But the very things we buy to get that admiration only serve as a benchmark for other people's self-centered desires. The onlookers do not admire you. They ignore you completely. They are too busy gawking at the object, imagining themselves as the centerpiece of a fantasy that you paid to facilitate. This is the psychological quicksand of modern consumerism. We spend money we have to buy things we don't need, to impress people who aren't even looking at us. Today, we are dissecting chapters 8 through 14 of Morgan Housel's masterwork, The Psychology of Money. We are going below the surface of spreadsheets and bank balances. We are entering the dark labyrinth of human behavior, where the things you don't spend determine your wealth, where malaria cures syphilis, and where field mice defeat the most sophisticated tanks on Earth. Welcome back to Leverage Chronicles. Wealth is what you don't see. To understand how we destroy our financial lives, we must first learn to read the invisible. During his years working as a valet in Los Angeles, Housel observed a regular customer named Roger. Roger was young, confident, and drove a roaring Porsche. He looked like a success story. He looked rich. And then, one day, Roger arrived in a beat-up, ancient Honda. "What happened to your Porsche?" Housel asked. Roger replied, without a single shred of shame, that the car had been repossessed after he defaulted on his car loan. Roger was rich, meaning his current income allowed him to make the monthly payments on a leased supercar, but he was not wealthy. We must establish a hard, unyielding line between these two concepts. Rich is current income. If someone drives a $100,000 car, they are almost certainly rich. Even if they bought the car with debt, they must have a high enough monthly cash flow to support the payment. Rich is visible. It is loud. It screams for your attention. But wealth is what you do not see. Wealth is the nice cars not purchased, the diamonds not bought, the luxury watches left in the showcase. The first-class upgrades declined, and the mansion bypassed for a modest home. Wealth is financial assets that have not been converted into depreciating physical junk. It is unspent income. It is an option that has not yet been exercised. Its value doesn't lie in what it buys today. Its value lies in the absolute freedom, flexibility, and security it provides for tomorrow. Consider the legendary singer Rihanna. Early in her career, she found herself staring into the abyss of near bankruptcy after burning through her massive earnings on luxury goods. She sued her financial advisor, claiming his mismanagement had ruined her. The advisor's dry, savage legal response should be printed on the first page of every personal finance book ever written. He wrote, "Was it really necessary to tell her that if you can spend money on things, you will end up with the things and not the money? It sounds comically simple." You may laugh, but the truth is, most people desperately need to be told this. When people say, "I want to be a millionaire," what they might actually mean is, "I want to spend $1 million." But spending $1 million is literally the exact opposite of being a millionaire. Because wealth is hidden. It requires self-control. It requires you to look at a pile of unspent cash and choose restraint over instant gratification. And since we cannot see other people's restraint, we have no role models for wealth. We only have role models for riches. We copy the spending, we never see the savings. The gap below the ego. How do you build this invisible wealth? It does not require genius-level intellect or a complex trading algorithm. It relies on a single, highly controllable metric, your savings rate. To understand why saving is your greatest financial weapon, look at the global energy crisis of the 1970s. In 1973, the world was gripped by a terrifying panic. The narrative was clear. The global economy was growing exponentially. We relied entirely on oil, and we were rapidly running out of it. The oil reserves simply could not keep up with our thirst. Yet, we did not run out of oil. Why? It wasn't because we suddenly discovered massive, hidden oceans of petroleum. And it wasn't because our drilling technology became miraculously advanced overnight. The primary reason we defeated the crisis is because we became incredibly efficient. We started building lighter cars that got double the miles per gallon. We insulated our homes better. We re-engineered our factories to squeeze more productivity out of every single watt of power. The United States uses 60% less energy per dollar of GDP today than it did in 1950. We grew our energy wealth, not by increasing the supply of what we had, but by radically decreasing the amount of energy we needed. Finding more oil is largely out of our control. It depends on geology, geopolitics, and luck. But becoming more efficient with what we already have is 100% within our control. The exact same dynamic governs your personal finances. You cannot control market returns. You cannot control whether the S&P 500 will grow at 8% or 4% over the next decade. You cannot control economic policy or global surprises, but you can absolutely control your frugality and efficiency. Wealth is simply the accumulated leftovers after you spend what you take in. You can build wealth without a high income, but you have zero chance of building wealth without a high savings rate. And the most powerful way to raise your savings rate has nothing to do with grinding for a raise. It is about raising your humility. Past a certain level of income, what you need is just what sits below your ego. Once your comfortable basics are covered, spending money is mostly a reflection of ego, approaching income, a way to show other people that you have money. When you define savings as the gap between your ego and your income, you realize why many highly paid professionals save almost nothing. They are caught in a perpetual, exhausting cycle of peacocking, desperate to keep up with peers who are doing the same. If you can learn to desire less and care less about what others think of you, you can easily save. And here is the ultimate secret of the wealthy. You do not need a specific reason to save. Most people only save for a down payment on a house, a new car, or retirement. But in a chaotic, volatile world, saving without a goal is a strategic masterpiece. Saving is a hedge against life's inevitable ability to surprise the hell out of you at the worst possible moment. Every dollar you save is a point in the future that would have been owned by someone else, an overbearing boss. A bad economic downturn, a medical emergency that you have successfully bought back for yourself. Savings without a goal gives you options and flexibility. It gives you the option to wait for a perfect job offer, rather than taking the first miserable option out of desperation. It gives you the oxygen to survive when the rest of the world is suffocating. In a highly automated, globalized economy where intelligence is no longer a scarce commodity, reasonable over rational, academic finance is built on an elegant, comforting assumption that humans are cold, logical spreadsheets who process data and make mathematically optimal decisions. But you are not a spreadsheet. You are a deeply emotional, flawed, and often terrified biological creature. Trying to be coldly rational when making financial decisions is a trap. Instead, you should aim to be merely reasonable. To understand why, let us examine one of the most bizarre and extreme treatments in the history of medicine. In the late 19th century, a psychiatrist named Wagner Jauregg was desperate to solve a horrifying crisis, neurosyphilis. In his era, this was a death sentence, leading to madness, paralysis, and painful decay. There was no known cure. But Wagner Jauregg noticed an odd, recurring pattern. Neurosyphilis patients who contracted an unrelated illness that triggered a massive, prolonged fever often made miraculous, sudden recoveries from their syphilis. He deduced a bold, almost insane hypothesis, that the heat of a fever was the body's natural weapon to incinerate the infection. So Wagner Jauregg did the unthinkable. He began intentionally injecting his terminal syphilis patients with low-end strains of typhoid, smallpox, and eventually malaria. This was incredibly dangerous. Some of his patients died from the induced fevers. But after intense trial and error, his experiments succeeded. The high, bone-rattling fevers triggered by malaria successfully killed off the heat-sensitive syphilis bacteria. Once the syphilis was destroyed, doctors simply cured the malaria using quinine. 6 out of 10 patients treated with malaria therapy made a full recovery. In 1927, Wagner Jauregg won the Nobel Prize in Medicine for his breakthrough. Today, modern science completely validates his theory. A 1-degree increase in body temperature has been proven to slow the replication rate of some viruses by a factor of 200. Normal fevers are good for us. They turn on our immune system to fight invaders. Yet, what is the very first thing we do the moment we or our children get a fever? We panic. We reach for Tylenol. We do everything in our power to suppress the fever as quickly as possible. Why? Because fevers hurt. It may be mathematically and biologically rational to let a fever run its course to fight off an infection. But it is utterly unreasonable to expect a shivering, suffering parent or patient under a cold blanket to just sit there and enjoy the pain. A doctor's goal is not just to cure disease. It is to cure disease within the confines of what is reasonable and tolerable to the patient. This exact same tension governs your money. Academic models can easily prove that you should use high debt and leverage when you are young to supercharge your stock portfolio. The math works perfectly on paper. It is highly rational. But when the market inevitably drops 50%, and your entire life savings evaporate in a matter of days, no normal human being can calmly stick to the plan. They panic. They sell out at the very bottom. They sue their advisor. They abandon the market forever. A rational strategy that you cannot stick with is a catastrophic liability. A reasonable strategy that is technically imperfect, but lets you sleep soundly at night, is a massive advantage. Even Markowitz, the legendary pioneer of modern portfolio theory who won a Nobel Prize for mathematically modeling the precise trade-off between risk and return, chose the reasonable path over his own rational equations. When asked how he invested his own money, Markowitz confessed that he simply split his portfolio 50-50 and 50 between stocks and bonds. If you love your technically imperfect strategy, you will have the emotional stamina to stick with it. During the lean years, anything that keeps you in the game has a quantifiable advantage. The fallacy of the prophet. There is a highly seductive, dangerous fallacy that plagues the financial world. We call it the historians as prophets fallacy. It is the over-reliance on past data as a signal to future conditions in a field where innovation and change are the lifeblood of progress. If you treat investing like a hard science, like physics, history should be a perfect guide to the future. Kidneys operate the same way in 2020 as they did in 1020. But investing is not a hard science. The brilliant physicist Feynman once dryly observed, "Imagine how much harder physics would be if electrons had feelings. Electrons do not get greedy or terrified. Electrons do not have to look at their spouses and kids and worry if their actions are destroying their future. But investors do. The cornerstone of history is that unprecedented, surprising events move the needle the most. Think of how different the global economy would be today, including a notorious 20th century dictator, a groundbreaking inventor of the light bulb, and the co-founder of Microsoft were never born. Think of the last century without World War II, the Great Depression, or the Internet. These massive, unpredictable outliers triggered a cascading, compounding wave of completely unrelated consequences. Consider the chain reaction of September 11th, 2001. The terrorist attacks on 9/11 prompted the Federal Reserve to cut interest rates. Those interest rates helped drive a housing bubble, The housing bubble burst, sparking the 2008 financial crisis, which led to a historic recession. That recession forced millions of people to seek shelter in higher education, which led to a massive increase in student loan debt. You cannot model this sequence in a spreadsheet. No historian in 2000 could have predicted that a student debt crisis would escalate this way. When we use past data to define our worst-case scenario, we make a catastrophic assumption. We assume that the worst past events will match future worst-case events. But the worst events of the past had no precedent when they occurred. Every historic worst case was, at the moment it occurred, completely unprecedented. It broke all the rules of what came before it. Even Graham, the father of value investing, recognized this reality. Throughout his career, Graham discarded and updated his published formulas 5 distinct times because he realized that specific market dynamics are constantly changing. Only human greed and fear remain eternal. History is not a blueprint. It is merely a study of how people behave under pressure. Field mice in the margin of safety. How do we survive in a world governed by unprecedented surprises? We look to a cold, frozen grassland outside Stalingrad in late 1942. The German army possessed the most sophisticated, technologically advanced machinery on the planet. A massive Panzer tank division sat in reserve, prepared to rush to the front lines to defend the city. But when the order came to deploy, the German generals were hit by a stunning shock. Out of 104 tanks in the unit, fewer than 20 were operable. During weeks of inactivity behind the front lines, field mice had nested inside the vehicles and eaten away the insulation, covering the complex electrical systems. The most powerful military machine on Earth was completely defeated by mice. No tank designer in Berlin had ever thought to include mouse protection in the schematics. It was a risk so bizarre and unpredictable that it lay completely outside their imagination. And that is the exact nature of risk. Real risk is not the volatility you expect. Real risk is what's left over when you think you've thought of everything. To survive the field mice of finance, you must rely on the margin of safety. Look at elite blackjack card counters. They do not play to win every single hand. They know that is statistically impossible. Instead, they calculate the odds, bet heavily when the deck is in their favor, and maintain a massive cash cushion to withstand inevitable swings of bad luck. They know that even with a 2% edge, the casino will still win 49% of the time. If you bet all your chips on a sure thing, a single bad turn of the cards will wipe you out forever. The purpose of a margin of safety is simple: to render forecasts completely unnecessary. If you build enough room for error into your finances, a high savings rate, zero margin debt, and ample cash, you do not need to predict when the next recession will hit. You don't need to be right all the time. The biggest single point of failure with money is a sole reliance on a paycheck to fund short-term spending. With zero savings to create a buffer, you must save for things you cannot possibly predict or even comprehend, the financial equivalent of field mice. The sunk cost trap. Even if you build a perfect financial plan, you face one final, highly destructive enemy: yourself. As humans, we suffer from a powerful psychological bias called the end of history illusion. It is our tendency to be keenly aware of how much we have changed in the past, but to underestimate how much our personalities, desires, and goals are likely to change in the future. At 18, you make career decisions for the person you will be at 40. At 40, you make investment decisions for the person you will be at 70. When you become those people, you are not always thrilled with the decisions your past self made for you. Housel recalls a close childhood friend whose life dream was to be a doctor. He worked harder than anyone else, bulldozed his way through medical school, and eventually achieved his ultimate goal. Housel spoke to him a few years ago. He told him, "Awful career, man." The stress and hours had worn him into the ground. He was as disappointed in where he is today as he was driven toward where he wanted to be 15 years ago. This wreaks havoc on long-term compounding. The first rule of compounding is to never interrupt it unnecessarily. But how do you not interrupt a money come? How do you plan when what you want out of life changes? You must learn to defeat sunk costs. Sunk costs are the trap, anchoring your current decisions to past efforts that can never be refunded. It is staying in a career you hate simply because you spent $80,000 on a college degree in that field. It is holding on to a failing investment simply because you spent months researching it. The legendary psychologist Daniel, who won the Nobel Prize in economics, possessed an incredible, almost superhuman ability. He would work endlessly with his writing partner, Jason, drafting entire chapters. Then, without a single moment of hesitation, Kahneman would suddenly tear up the entire draft and rewrite it from scratch. When Jason asked him how he could discard weeks of intense, exhausting labor so easily, Kahneman replied with 5, that we must burn into our minds, "I have no sunk costs." To compound effectively over a lifetime, you must accept that your past self was a stranger. Do not hold your future self hostage to decisions made by a younger, different version of you. Avoid the extreme ends of financial planning. Aim for balance at every stage. Accept change. And abandon past goals without mercy the moment they no longer serve your happiness. The ultimate price of admission to the compounding casino is not measured in gold or currency. It is paid in volatility, fear, doubt, and regret. To survive, you must exit the status game. Respect the invisible field mice of risk, and understand that the ultimate dividend money pays is not a flashy car or a bigger house. It is the quiet, unbreakable sovereignty over your own time. Thank you for watching Leverage Chronicles. If this part of the journey challenged how you think about your wealth, hit the subscribe button. Leave your thoughts in the comments and share this video with someone who needs to see the invisible. Until next time.